Hi, Montana. Here's your final report from the special session. This morning, we were supposed to start at 10 and we couldn't get started until 11. The floor session considered making all of these proposed cuts permanent by adding them into House Bill 2 from the regular session. By statute, the governor has to make temporary cuts or find some other solution in order to balance the budget until the next legislative session. And by making these cuts permanent, this legislature has reduced the spending power for all of the next legislative sessions. So they have now officially finished what they started in 2003 by eliminating tax brackets. They have brown-backed the state of Montana. This morning when that happened, I felt like they were just forcing the governor to permanently cut some or temporarily cut all. I had heard that they had a transfer bill. We initially started talking about $75 million in cuts, $75 million in revenue, and $75 million in transfers. We got here and they said, no, we're not doing any revenue, figure it out some other way. So we still had this transfer availability to take and move money around from one account to another. But when they worded that transfer bill, they put in a trigger mechanism so that if the governor line item vetoed even making any of those cuts permanent or vetoed the whole thing so that the cuts were temporary and not permanent, then the governor is left without any of the transfer money, which would mean that he would have to choose himself where to cut the $75 million missing dollars. So really, really conniving strategy there. And the people who are making these decisions are the ones who have been sitting in on the negotiations from the very beginning. And really, we're just using that time to come up with a pretty brilliant plan to trap the governor. On third reading, they doubled down on having Montana apply for waivers from the Affordable Care Act and on furloughs for state employees and on those permanent cuts. We waited 5 hours to come back to the floor, and then we had some interesting votes and some agreement. The House voted 49 to 51 not to take a 3% management fee on the $1.6 billion of investment earnings in the state fund. That would have given us $30 million towards this budget crisis. But then on a motion to reconsider, 65 people voted to reconsider it. These guys were clearly just playing a game of chicken with each other and with the governor and with the Democrats, and it backfired on them, so they just made a motion to reconsider and voted for it. They, in a reasonable point of the evening, voted 45 to 55 not to rob the MDC fund. So the 11 patients who are still at the Montana Developmental Center will have the funds that they need for their care. The House voted 87 to 13 to repeal or terminate block grants to schools. That really represents a compromise because when the school community was faced with how they potentially could be cut in this special session, the leaders across the state got together, got out in front of the issue and said, don't do anything that's unconstitutional. Don't mess with the school funding formula for Montana. Look at these block grants. Everyone's giving a pound of flesh here, except for the private prison corporation that just got a handout. But Montanans are giving their pound of flesh here, and that's where public schools chipped in. The vote was 98 to 2 on taking a 2-month holiday on our state contribution to the Public Employee Health Insurance Fund. That gives us $10 million to use for the budget crisis and shouldn't affect the public employees' insurance premiums. When the motion was made to reconsider the vote about Montana Developmental Center, it failed. We then waited until midnight to vote on filling in the fire fund from the general. That's $40 million to the fire fund. That passed 100-0. And then we had this transfer bill that I was just talking about. It was House Bill 6, and it represented more than $90 million towards this budget problem. But it was a trap because in addition to listing all of the transfers that are needed to fix this budget crisis, it said, by the way, if the governor tries to make any of these cuts temporary instead of permanent, none of these transfers will happen. I don't think it's right to take away the right of any governor to veto. I am offended by the extreme majority's strategy to hold the entire state hostage so that they can get a private prison in Shelby. I am disappointed in their brown backing our state, and I'm not going to be a party to it. So I was the only no vote on that more than $90 million bill. The liquor lottery bill passed 81-19. That's $6 million just by auctioning the liquor licenses instead of giving them to a lottery. Then we voted on Senate Bill 9. Senate Bill 9 was the linchpin to the entire special session. You know, if we can get the moderate and responsible Republicans to join with most of the Democrats, we can pass really responsible solutions. And that would have worked out really, really well if two of those responsible Republicans wouldn't have both lived in a community that CoreCivic, a $1.7 billion company from Tennessee, was trying to profit off of Montana prisoners. They sold the state out for crony capitalism. They orchestrated this brilliant idea to make sure that there was absolutely no way to pass any of these budget fixes without either the governor having to come up with $227 million worth of temporary cuts all on his own, or renegotiating this private prison contract. It passed 58-42, so one Republican joined with the Democrats in saying, no, we don't support either the hijacking of the state or the private prison. And then when we reconsidered the state fund bill, it passed 72-28, showing that the first vote really was just posturing. So that gave us another $30 million to fill the hole. The majority then adjourned on a nearly party line vote. 37 of us voted not to adjourn, and we're leaving Helena leaving a $27 million hole in this budget, which is, of course, exactly or nearly exactly the same exact amount of the private prison contract. We did not give Blue Cross Blue Shield their corporate payoff, and we didn't even discuss anymore the transgender birth certificate issue. So there were some reasonable things that happened today. I think I'm on the right side, not being party to what will be permanent cuts to the state budget in the long run. I wish I had better news for you. Please keep in mind that this whole budget was fraudulent to begin with. Every single Democrat voted against not only the revenue estimate on which the budget was based, but the budget itself. We knew something like this was going to happen. The problem was exacerbated by a terrible fire season. These votes were not in line with Montana values, and elections really, really do matter.